Okay, so let us start down the end with my arch nemesis, John Zest. Introduce yourself. Try not to bore everybody with an entire autobiography, but maybe tell us how you got involved at CAFE.
Okay, my name is Don Zest. I'm the Associate Branch Director for CAFE in Calgary. And just so everybody knows and we're clear that we actually are operating right now. We're part-time and the goal is to go to full-time, just like...
Speak right into the mic.
Put it right up next to your
right
mouth.
here.
There we go.
Never mind.
So the goal is to be a full-time center, just like what David was showing us. And we've been working part-time for quite some time now. So yeah, it's really great to be here, and it's exciting to see things moving forward. And it was a surprise to us even to raise additional money, so I very much appreciate that today. Thank you.
All right, Dr. Gans.
Hi, I'm Dr. Gans Ferens. So my deal is I really hate bullies and don't like discrimination. And this is, kind of one of those situations where it feels like, instead of looking at the equality and the work that's being done, there is a lot of misconceptions around what this work is. And so this is why I'm involved and why I want to help even the playing field with it.
All right, perfect. Next, on the line.
David Shackleton. Is this on?
It's on.
Yep.
Yep, it's on.
Yeah?
You got to practically eat it.
Okay. So I've been interested in men's issues for over 25 years, and so I'm excited to see how much progress has been made in the last few years. I think that there's a groundswell of support, and I'm happy to be a part of that. And anyway, I'm branch director of CAFE Ottawa and chair of the board of the CCMF Ottawa.
Okay, and next one.
I'll try my mic. Did it work?
Yeah. You're coming through clear.
So my name is Christine Giancarlo, and I'm a professor at Mount Royal University here in Calgary. I'm an anthropologist who didn't know anything about men's issues or parental alienation, which is my specialty, until about 2007. And I've been involved ever since then, pretty much with a focus on children and the need for two parents. And so, as similar to what Gans was saying, I have huge concerns about the lack of equality that we're seeing in various issues, and obviously feminism is critical because we still have a long way to go to reach equality in the workplace and in life in general. However, because of that, we have also seen men slip through the cracks in various areas, and right now the focus on women has left men scrambling for a place in society. And so I am both a feminist and an anthropologist, and I am a huge spokesperson for parents. And I don't really care what chromosomes you have. I'm really concerned about the fact that some parents are not being allowed to parent, and that is a lot the fault, majorly the fault of the legal system, in my opinion. So I did a study that was published in 2015 called Kids Come Last. And then I wrote a book based on the 29 cases of parental alienation where one parent had been erased. And that book is now being published called Parentectomy. And we also are just about finished with a documentary that will be coming out later this year, hopefully, or early 2019, called Erasing Family. And so it doesn't involve women who are not in their children's lives, as well as men who are not in their children's lives. And it also involves grandparents. And so our whole onus, and it probably will be mine for a very long time, sadly, is to put parents back and grandparents in children's lives and to give kids the best foundation possible so that they can grow up to be productive, compassionate citizens. And I think that's everyone's concern.
All right, perfect. And
I'm Christine Berry. I'm a psychologist, and I'm also the director of the Family Violence Prevention Initiatives at the Calgary Counselling Centre. The reason I'm here is because Dan came into my office one day, he just kind of wandered in and said, hey. But Calgary Counselling Centre, we have the only program, I think, I know for sure in Alberta, but probably across Canada, we have a program for males who have been abused. So there's a lot of programs for women who've experienced abuse. There's a lot of programs for men who abuse. We also have a program for women who abuse, and we have the Male Domestic Abuse Outreach Program at our center. So we have been working in terms of looking at persons, including males and females, for many, many years. The interesting thing is that as a counseling center, we have about a 43-38 split. So about 38% of our clients, about 42% of our clients are actually male. And in the last year, we have seen an increase in males requesting services. There's a lot of research going on these days about the gap in services for males, but it's being directed specifically at the area of domestic violence, which is where I specialize. So the other piece of research that's going on is with male victims of abuse. So there's some interesting things, I think, going on in Alberta.
All right, perfect. That's really good to know that that you guys offer services in that way. It's extremely rare, I think, for particularly if an agency or an organization started out helping battered women specifically, to notice the need and expand beyond that to helping men and helping female batterers get the help they need to. So this discussion is called Unique Challenges of Providing Services for Men and Boys. And we have 14 hours scheduled for that. And probably won't be able to get to everything, but just to get things started, and I didn't really make a big list of questions or anything. I have things that I want everybody's opinion on that will come up, but I like to have organic conversations. So I'm going to ask you all to think about and let us all know, what do you think is the biggest stumbling block to being able to provide services? And don't just say funding. Okay, maybe explain why you think the funding isn't there. So who wants to go first? David.
I think that the fundamental issue that we're wrestling with in providing services for men is the lack of empathy for men compared to women. When men are suffering, we tend, not everybody as always, we're talking generalizations here, but in society, we tend to expect men to be self-responsible, to be able to solve their own problems. And if they can't, there's some judgment of that. There's some, are they really real men? So it's hard for us to empathize with men when they are struggling, compared to how it comes so naturally for us to do that with women. If I think back into my own experience about where does my empathy for men come from? And it comes from the fact that I felt loved by my father. And so I think there's a role for men to play in solving this. I think that fathers that make good emotional bonds with their children, with their male children, raise the level of empathy for men in society. I think that that's one way that it happens.
Okay, anybody else?
Yeah, for me, I think that jumping on that point too, I think there's also, of course, there's a huge stigma around this, right? Because men don't know that it's a good thing or it's all okay, or more importantly, that it's responsible. I saw a commercial, I think it was from ADAC. It might not be for me, I'm not sure exactly where it was, but it was a rowboat, and there were two little kids in there with their life jackets on, and they were sitting there and they were playing a children's song. I think it was like, row, row, row your boat, or whatever it was, right? And the kids were just sitting there looking around, and there were two life jackets in the boat, and the parents were gone. and it said, you know, when you don't wear your life jackets, your kids suffer too. And I think that that is something that we don't quite understand as men or as a society. We haven't put that out there, that it's extremely responsible for men to take care of themselves and to go for help early, and that it's a healthy, loving, responsible, manly thing to do. And so to me, it's the stigma and education that needs to happen around that.
Right. I think women can play a role in terms of helping their husband's self-care by essentially saying, like my mom did with my dad at one point when he refused to go to the doctor, and he was not doing well. He was quite ill, and my mom said, "Do you realize how much you're hurting me by not doing this?" Right? I don't want to, you know, do you think I want you to lose you? Do you think I want you to get sicker? You taking care of you is you taking care of me. And so when you put it that way, I guess maybe, you know, he felt maybe sometimes you have to guilt men into going to the doctor. But
Well, honestly, what I've seen in my practice is that men, you know, well, and women do this to some extent too, but there is this sense that we have to protect, and we have to protect the family. And so we want to protect the family also from bad news or from stress or whatever it is. But invariably, it is the opposite. The more we, you know, keep stuff to ourselves, the more we don't look after ourselves, the more we damage the people we care about and love.
right, okay, Don, anything to say?
Well, I found that too often men wait till it's too late, or they're so reactionary where they're already past the point of we can offer you some good help, because
So they're getting help in prison or whatever.
yeah, like
Counseling,
they're already
right?
the night before they go to court,
Yeah.
and they're calling for some help, and it's like, where were you 2 months ago? You know,
They were ignoring the problem.
That's
probably.
right.
Yeah, pretending it didn't exist so that it would just, you know, maybe it would just go away.
yeah.
Yeah. One of the Christines, what would you like to add?
So I think it's a huge question. As a psychologist, I look at the culture of shame that men are raised in, and women as well. The culture of shame that says that it's a sign of weakness for men to ask for help, as opposed to kind of reframing that and seeing that it takes a lot of courage to ask for help. I know in the Calgary Counselling Centre, often we have men come forward because someone in their family has identified that you really, really need to get something going differently here, and I might leave you unless you do that. And so the motivation may not be kind of from within, but it's around their family. They're very motivated to come for help because of their family. But first of all, we have to do something about the whole connection between masculinity, weakness, and the ability to say, I've got a problem and I don't know what to do about it, and what do you think would be helpful?
Can I add to that comment? You know, it's very often mentioned that, you know, men should show their feelings, right? But if they really do that, how people are programmed is very often also a consequence of reward and punishment. You do that to your partner, for example, and the predominant number of females are gone, right? So men, and Karen very often talks about that or comments on that, they very often want to have at least partly a strong man at home, right? I don't know what the percentage is, but if you don't play that role, you know, you probably will have to look for another partner. So that's kind of the punishment. You know, it's one thing to open up, but if you get punished for that, you will not do that a second time or third time. Although you might be strong and you say, well, I don't need that, and I go forward with that anyway, right? I think it's a little bit more complicated than just say men need to open up more, right? If they would get rewarded on that, yes.
I would agree with that to a significant degree too. But I also have to. We're not going to be able to change any of those attitudes without having some people make the first steps in changing the attitudes, right? So and maybe raising awareness around it, you know, particularly compassionate psychologists and advocates and stuff, raising awareness around the fact that women do that. A lot of women do that. Brene Brown, who we watched a clip from one of her talks this morning in Mara's keynote, she studies shame. And she said, she relayed a story, she was at book signing, and there was a man in line with 3 books for her to sign. And he said, I'd like to ask you something. Why don't you talk about men? And she says, well, because I don't study them. And he says, well, that's convenient. And she says, why? I don't understand what the problem is. And he says, you see these 3 books here? You see those 3 women over there, you know, my wife and my 2 daughters. You know, you talk about, you know, the white knight instinct and how harmful that is and all of those and feelings of shame and stuff. They would rather see me die on my white horse than fall off of it. Those 3 women.
Right.
And it isn't my football coach, and it's not my dad, and it's not other men in my life putting this pressure on me. It's those 3 women who I love very much. And she said that was a real wake-up call. She said it almost brought her to tears. And so she started studying men and shame too. So I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done, both in research with psychologists who actually are interested in this and have compassion for men and really want to help them to understand the root of the problem and how much we can actually adjust the attitudes. And sometimes adjusting the attitude really is being aware of the fact that it's not this part of your brain that is making you panic when you see your man break down. It's not this bit here. It's this really primal bit back here that has existed since, you know, we were like little lizards. And are we going to really act on that, on our what our amygdalas tell us to do?
Can you control it?
Or, well, you can actually control your emotions to a certain degree. So I think that, yeah, I mean, I think that what you say has absolute validity, but okay, now I'm not being a moderator, I'm being a speaker, I'm sorry.
I'll put you on the spot, so.
All right, and Christine Giancarlo.
You asked Karen about the biggest stumbling block,
Mm-hmm.
and so I could probably think of a few. I'm going to mention 2. One, I think, is polarization. And so we want to be careful of polarizing genders. And I think that is, you were talking earlier, I think it was David talking about funding and grants, and because that's sort of my background in academia, I know that it's difficult to get anything if you call it a men's effort. So as unfair as that may be, that's how it works. And so I think that in order to get funding and in order to have a higher profile, then to apply is based instead on human rights and on parenting rights. And so if you apply to an organization that is quite mainstream but has in the past funded only women's issues, then the question is why? And so if the grant is framed that this is a human rights, a child rights issue and that children deserve both parents, and you need a grant to make sure that both parents are doing their duty as well as their great privilege to parent their children, I think you may find that you have a better chance at receiving grants. And make no mistake, I'm very aware that we're incredibly biased in this society, and when we talk about children and parenting, it is very much against men. And so the reason for that, and probably you were all aware, but we come from a history of patriarchy. And so the courts are set to make sure that that is not the decision they're making, the appearance of a patriarchal decision. And so they are going to swing towards usually mom, but as I said, moms can also be badly treated for different reasons. But because the courts have that bias based on a history of patriarchy, you have to undo that thinking first, and you have to get people to start thinking about us as persons first. And so thanks for mentioning personhood, and I think Christine did as well, as opposed to men versus women. And where does that leave trans parents? I mean trans parents, not see-through parents. And so I think that that's a huge issue in terms of funding, and also to pay attention to the shame factor. And sometimes men can be so shamed that they will not speak up at all. And so maybe an organization like this is a start, and it provides some support, but it's not enough. And so CAFE is doing a great job, that's the one I know more about, in advocating and getting men to feel comfortable in speaking out and saying, you know, hey, I'm a parent too. Earlier today, I was presenting at my school, and there, as part of it, there was a dance recital. And after the dance recital, the owner of the dance club asked all the parents to, at least one parent, to come and collect their children. And after, I had to ask her, and I said, how do you know if the child's actually allowed to go with that parent? And she said, well, if it's a dad, we ask for the court order ahead of time. And I said, so that would be for moms too? No. And so that was just one example. And so it's so all-pervasive in our society, as we all know. And so to try to get people out of that polarized thinking, which is stalling action on this issue, and sorry to hog the mic here, but the other thing was to also have men do stuff, you know, as opposed to just having support. So things like writing letters, they actually count. And so if you talk yourself out of it thinking, well, nobody's going to read this, I'm a man, and you know they don't want to hear this, they will care when they get thousands of letters. And this is very timely because Bill C-78 is in the works right now to amend the divorce laws in Canada, and they are going to get a whole lot worse. And I personally can't imagine them getting much worse. But that's what's happening. And so I've written a letter, and I'm encouraging other people to write letters, and I hope you will just Google it and find out what is on the table here, because it's really scary.
All right, perfect. Is there anything else you wanted to add? Because you kind of...
Yeah, I've had a lot of experience working with men in men's groups. And what's interesting is most of that experience is for males who've been mandated to family violence prevention groups. And one of the most powerful things that happens in those groups is when men hear the voice of other men. And it's a relatively unique circumstances for them to actually be honest and transparent and connected with other men. That's a really powerful experience for them, which I think is denied often in the non-therapy world.
All right, perfect. Okay, getting back to, let's find some new stumbling blocks. David, one of the audience members, mentioned something about crowdfunding and knowing someone who's really successful at raising a whole bunch of money. And yeah, we do, anybody who does anything to do with men's rights is probably crowdfunded in some way, because that shit don't pay. And even if you're a professional, often and could offer your services for pay, a lot of these guys can't afford it. You can be the best family law lawyer for men in the world. If the guy can't afford you, there's not a whole lot you can do for him, and you're not going to be getting any fees from him. But the internet itself, right, is, I mean, part of the reason that this whole thing exists right now is because of the internet. But there's a double edge to the internet, and I was wondering if you guys what you thought about social media, what you think about not only things like fundraisers or awareness videos and stuff going viral, but the other side of that, which is once something goes viral, it can go viral in a really negative way. And do you guys ever find yourselves, on the end of a whole bunch of heat because you speak out in places where there are lots of people listening? And basically, I'm asking, how much abuse do you get? So.
Well, thankfully, I haven't had any. Not to say that it won't happen, but it was a fear in getting involved. Mostly because, I have kids. My kids are on the internet. I thought, the worst thing for me would be for my kids to be saying, hey Dad, I heard this, or my friend said that, that would be devastating. But I've had lots of calls from men who said, hey, I shared this or said that, and the barrage of hate that came my way afterwards was unbelievable. And I had to basically talk them off the ledge on how to recoup from that, and how to understand how to, you know, just at least let people know that they're allowed to speak, and not be fearful of the repercussions of somebody trying to tear apart a sentence. Because the reality of all of us is we have rights to speak, but believe me, if it's not something that consensus agrees on, people will tear it apart and try to make you look bad for it. And that's a big reason for men not coming out to our events sometimes. And I've heard that from other groups where they've said, you know what, lots of guys would love to come out, but they don't want to deal with somebody putting them down for it.
Right.
And you know, being shamed for you know, possibly just sticking up for your kids.
Yeah.
It is not something any of us want to have to deal with, but you know, people also want to preserve their right of being a parent, and they don't want to be losing anything that they maybe fought really hard in court for.
Dr. Gans, do you have anything to add to that, or?
I kind of hate social media because I think it's the poison of society right now. I don't know if there's actually a consensus anymore. I think we have sort of a, I don't know what to call it, but it's almost like a pissed off Olympics that's happening right now, where everybody
Outrage
wants
Olympics?
to see, what's that? Outrage Olympics, yeah, absolutely. You kind of want to pick apart the internet to look for something you can be angry at and then make a statement about that. But I do think that there's a way to maybe harness that and use that as a tool to help spread some equality and some message of hope. I was really encouraged by what you had said about the fact that you guys showed the movie and you got all this outrage and this, you know, these people protesting, and hey, 3 times as many people want to see it now, so that's awesome. So I think, you know, so it does cut the other way sometimes, and I think if we can harness that to, you know, speak truth around the fact that it's not about polarization, even though it's going to be a polarizing issue, unfortunately. But, you know, we're not trying to polarize, we're actually working for equality and equal rights and kindness and compassion and those sorts of things. But the fact that people see it this way, well, we can use that for some momentum to actually make things move a little faster.
Well, that'd be called the Streisand effect. You know, when you freak out, people pay attention, and then they're curious about what that guy was freaking out about. I better go see that movie. Do you have anything to say, David? No? Yes?
Yeah, I think that the internet can offer some things, but, you know, I don't think we really know how to use it well yet for healing. You know, I mean, I've heard of, like, internet groups for people who are addicted to the internet, like, really.
That seems counterproductive.
Yeah, so, you know, let's look at an example of, you know, that men are struggling with. Is one issue is sexual abuse of children. The most common pattern in this is that men, as young men, are, you know, victims of this, have not any awareness of their situation. They push through. They're advancing their careers. In their 30s, they typically have some symptoms, and they medicate them with drink or workaholism or something like that. And, you know, the most common pattern for sexually abused males is that they show up in therapy in their 40s or their 50s. And by that time, they, you know, their symptoms are complicated, they are prolonged, they are serious, and I don't know where I'm going with this, except to say that, you know, I think that this is, again, another unique male situation that, you know, we're not, for some reason, we're not able to catch people early in their lives and offer appropriate treatment.
Well,
so we end up with very complicated, much more severe prolonged and long-standing symptoms that are much harder to work with.
Well, I think maybe the internet can help with that, at least in terms of pointing men in the right direction when they actually, if and when they actually need something. Christine G., I would like to ask you if you're ever worried about sort of the fake news phenomenon, you know, those zombie statistics that might, you know, because as much as awareness of these issues can spread through the internet, and in a very, very, you know, you throw it up in the air and then it's everywhere. You can also have false information spreading, information on domestic violence that says that 95 or 98% or however many, 112% of the victims are women, and 146% of the batterers are men. So I think that, do you see the internet as being, you know, a net positive, or?
I don't know that it would matter whether it was internet or it was just on paper. You know, statistics have always been dangerous things as well as helpful things. And so we do want to be aware of where those statistics are coming from and why are they often silent on the other half of the population. So definitely, I don't know that that's anything new. Maybe it's easier in terms of accessibility now, for sure. But there are also lots of good TED Talks and YouTube videos right now that are out there that are very helpful for men. They're very helpful for all of us, I think, in gaining strength and also bettering our chances of actually getting equality in society, because we are more knowledgeable, and knowledge is power. And so I think that it can be a very useful tool. It's, again, how it's used. There's a very strong movement right now, the alt-right, and the alt-right is being fueled by, well, Donald Trump, you know, for example, and now Doug Ford in Ontario. And so, as you know, I'm being kind of political here, but those things count in society. And so when you have people like that who are not about equality, then they're going to swing the polarization even more towards women. Count on it. And so it's really important that the information is there to diffuse those skewed statistics. And you know, the idea that getting funding and that sort of thing for men's organizations and men's rights, as I said, I know that that's unfair, but that's the reason why. Because when, as Don Zest was saying, when he feels maybe afraid of what kind of abuse will I get through the internet or who's contacting me, I'm a woman and I actually am fearful. I'm not fearful of men, but I'm fearful of all the fake news and the fake information out there. And so I think it's really true that as a woman, I have a huge advantage. And so I'm happy to speak out on men's issues, but I never want to be known as a spokesperson for a men's rights group. And so that may seem unfair.
You just ruined your reputation by sitting on this stage.
I probably
Next
did.
to me, I am every slur you can think of. That's fine.
Well, I'm not saying that that's not a worthy cause. It's absolutely a worthy cause, and that's why I'm sitting here today. But
I get it.
You know, it's not going to go anywhere, and so we have to. In order to, it sounds crazy, but in order to get men's rights and men's equality on those issues that we are sadly lacking behind it, it's absolutely barbaric what's being done to men in the social sphere, and you know, sexual assault, they cannot come out and so on. But we're not allowed, you as a man are not allowed to call it men's rights. So that's unfair, because we can talk about women's rights all day and everybody will be fine with it. But I'm just telling you that that's how it will be portrayed. And so I have to be careful as an academic that I am always speaking on behalf of parents, on behalf of humans. And I know my study was 25 dads and 3 moms. And I had to work hard to find those 3 moms who were alienated from their children, because the courts are skewed. But I'm not going to say that this is a men's rights paper or this is a men's rights issue, because nobody's going to listen to me anymore.
I hear you.
I think the bigger thing, though, is having Calgary Counselling here, stating the facts of what they're seeing.
Oh, yeah.
And they're the ones getting the court mandated stuff and programs. And that's amazing to have you here speaking up for that, because it's not about men's rights or women's rights. It's about parents' rights. That's generally why we're all here, is for parents and for kids. And the kids don't have any voice in this, right?
Yeah. Do you have anything to add about, like in terms of, I was actually going to ask you, are you aware of it's called the Partner Abuse State of Knowledge Project?
I am not.
Oh, okay. Usually it has gotten almost no traction, but it's actually 17 meta-analyses of 100 studies each, finding, partner gender symmetry and partner violence. And it's one of the biggest projects out there, and it has gotten zero press. It's been out there for 2 years or something like that. Zero press. So I just wanted to point it out to you. I just wanted to give it a look. It goes into all kinds of different things like causes and risk factors.
So I know there's a gentleman out there that has a question. On a personal level, I don't tweet, I don't Twitter, I don't have a Facebook.
That's probably a good idea.
I do none of that. That's not where my comfort zone is. On a professional level, I think the internet is a wonderful tool, and use it with discretion, and you can use it to get information out, and I think that's wonderful. Back to your point, there has been literature for about 25 years.
Oh, yeah, since 1979.
Even that talks about the gender symmetry.
Mm-hmm.
But as someone who wants to get money, you don't talk about those stats. You talk about the stats that support your argument. And so that is the reality of the funding world, which is kind of a blood sport these days. The other point is that the Male Domestic Abuse Outreach Program at our center is actually funded by the government. We actually have dollars for that. But I know there's a guy out there that has had his hand up.
Yeah, I had a study published a couple months ago on male stigma, and it seems to impact on a lot of what has been talked about so far. Yes, it's the idea is out there. It's been out there for decades that men are shamed into not seeking counseling, but I don't think that is the whole story. The men I talked to in the study of male stigma in Canada did not feel that the institutions were receptive to them. There was the idea that if there was a woman said one thing and they said another thing, the woman's story would always be taken first.
Yes.
And this was very much shown up not just with clients of social workers, but students in social work and social workers themselves. At all these levels, that was found. It was also found in counseling professions. I went to, a decade and a half ago, I went to a conference of the Canadian Psychological Association here in Calgary, and I went to a workshop put on by a couple of women counselors on how to counsel men. I was wondering what kind of reaction I would have got from the CPA committee if I had offered to put on a workshop on how to counsel women. However, I went to this workshop and it was interesting. The workshop leaders asked and it was packed, mostly with women, and asked how many of these counselors had actually counseled a man. And fewer than half had counseled men. My guess is men are not feeling welcome, or not feeling believed. Now, we talk about funding, and how if you label a thing a men's group or a men's project, we can't get public funding for this. Well, does that not speak to stigma as well? And we talk about the internet. What's happened with the internet? Well, the people, one of the Christines mentioned Donald Trump. Trump is an interesting political phenomenon, isn't he? Why? He's using the internet very effectively to speak to his base. What has happened with his base? The base does not believe the mainstream media. So they're not listening to the mainstream media. They see the mainstream media as presenting fake news. So, if anything, the internet has been divisive, and it's not bringing us together. Anyway, thank you for listening.
So, thank you for joining us. Because I think your point about invitational and friendly and welcoming is right bang on. One of about a year and a half ago, one of the projects that I was involved in, they actually took to task a lot of the social service agencies in terms of how friendly and welcomingly are you to males. In other words, when you talk about parents, do you include dad? Do you just say, when mom? Do you even have bathrooms for males in your facility? So they looked at kind of the very small details that would encourage males to come and visit you. And happily, Calgary Counselling Centre, this is just something that we just have been doing forever. But it was a bit distressing to know that there's still agencies that are not male-friendly, for lack of a better term. So interesting that you brought up that topic. Thank you.
I wanted to ask, because I get in these discussions all the time about the best approach. And most of the time we have to be pragmatic and we have to say, well, we have to turn fathers' rights into a children's rights issue, and we have to turn, domestic violence, against men into, what's the impact on the children. It's the same whether mom's hitting dad or dad's hitting mom. They're both learning violence is the way to solve their problems. So we always have to turn to that most vulnerable person. But something that you said about I need to be seen as, Christine, as advocating for humans, for parents, for persons, gender neutral, blah, blah, blah. Do you think that, because I have even seen so much resistance from women's advocates to even suggesting taking they don't, egalitarian, they don't even want to utter the word. So do you think maybe there's a reason that maybe human rights issues aren't going to get the kind of funding that women's rights issues would get? Do any of you feel like that might be a thing? That once you de-sex the problem, the funding is going to dry up once it's no longer considered a women's issue?
Well, I think that the divisiveness is what's driving everything right now. This is not just around parents' rights or men's rights or women's rights or whatever. This is about racism. This is about poor versus rich. This is about everything. And you really see that, people making crazy money on driving people apart. So I unfortunately think that the more division there is, the more people make money. And so this has to be, to me, a societal change that needs to shift. It's we have to understand that that's the actual enemy. The polarization is the actual enemy, and the solution is love and acceptance and inclusion. And that's what we have to start, talking about and showing and being examples for in our families, but also in discussions, even with people on the other side from wherever we think we are.
Okay. All right. Anyone else have thoughts on that?
I'm sorry, I'm a bit slow today. I'm still in the previous one about welcoming therapies for men, so I want to speak a little bit to that. So one aspect of that, I think, is that we don't always configure services in ways that would work for men. So I think that a lot of because women have been the primary consumers of therapeutic services, therefore the forms that they tend to take are forms that tend to work for women and perhaps not so much for men. So, for instance, grieving. Men, I think, tend to be the ones who want to do memorials for lost people, want to do something. I know when my dog died, my wife went and sat by the grave and wept. And I made a headstone, carved it out of, anyway. the service configuration, I think, is an important difference. I went looking a few years ago for a modality of working with emotions that would work better for men than I think sort of basic talk therapy does. And I found that the biggest organization working with men in North America in a therapeutic way is something called the Mankind Project. And they've got like 100,000 people they process through their weekends. And they use something called psychodrama. And psychodrama is a therapeutic technique in which you reenact traumatic experiences and reconfigure them into a way that works better for you. So, you have somebody play your father or your mother or whatever.
And you get to really tell them off and
you
come
get
up with the good comeback before the next day.
You get to reconfigure. You get to have them you get to tell them how much that hurt and have them apologize to you. And we're so good at projecting on people that we can project in a therapeutic way. We can project our father or our mother onto somebody in a group like that, and take some real healing from having it be as if it was the person involved saying those things to us. So this is a therapeutic technique that I think works a lot better with men, but it's used almost nowhere in mainstream therapy. So I think there are a lot of service configuration issues like this that we could push forward, do some research into, and start figuring out what really works well for men.
Can I just add to that? Because I did talk therapy and stuff, but I just had a notion to try hypnotherapy about 2 months ago, and it was extraordinary. So I don't know whether it's gender biased in some way, but I just sought it out, and I did it. And to deal with some of my trauma, it was amazing. It took me back to when I was like 6 years old in boarding school, and it was cathartic at that level. So I don't know if any other men listening might want to try that, or if it's already been discussed, but it's very good.
All right. I'm not sure whether I have a whole lot of other questions. I'm still. Oh, go ahead.
Can I just speak to the last one more or less about the divisiveness? And so to follow up from what Gans was saying, that we used to think that sex and gender were the same thing. So if you were a man, you behaved a certain way. If you were a woman, you behaved a certain way. And then we finally got out of those gender straitjackets, and we recognized that a human is a human first and can behave however they want as long as they are a productive, inclusive citizen. And so we also used to believe that there were such things as biological races of humans, and we now know there are not. So people want to hold on to those beliefs. And so when we are talking about men counselors versus women counselors, and I understand that there are preferences, I also know that there are, in my study, most of the men said they would prefer to go to a woman counselor. But I don't believe that's because she has 2 X chromosomes. I think it's because she was enculturated to be a nurturer. And for them to go to a man, he was enculturated to be a provider and a tough, dominant guy. So even if he's the best counselor ever, it may be that some men would rather go to a woman. So all of us are stuck in those old beliefs, and until we start to open up some of those barriers and break down the walls, we're not getting very far. And that's why I guess I keep repeating, but I don't want to polarize things because I don't want to feed into the divisiveness that Gan's been talking about.
Anybody else have comments to add to that? Yeah, I was going to open it up to the audience because I'm tired of thinking of interesting questions to ask. So I'm going to call upon Dr. Brown, my favorite James Brown. Ow, I feel good. All right, what would you like to ask?
I just wanted to go further to what David was saying. See, we speak up. We say that men don't speak about their problems. Well, it's quite possible that all the men in this room here don't speak about their problems. But I guarantee you that in general, men do speak about their problems. They just don't speak about them in the same kind of setting that women speak about them. And there's some studies going on now in, I believe it's Australia, it could be New Zealand, where they're looking at this whole issue around how men do speak about their issues, but how it's not in the traditional therapeutic session. And the reason they're suggesting, of course, is that because patriarchy, or whatever you'd like, because we have treated women as if they were the ones that had all the mental health issues, we've developed models that are designed for women. And now we're fitting men into those models. And the reality is, in terms of service, providing service, we're providing service in a way that isn't necessarily applicable to men. And I'm not talking about the biological issue. I'm talking about the way men have been socialized. But if I can take that one step further without taking us totally off track here, the education system is undergoing the same kinds of problems. And it's a presumption that the model that we have is appropriate for everyone because it's worked for the people who have been providing it. So this is just further to what Dave was saying, and hopefully I didn't just disagree with you, Dave, because I think I'm agreeing with you.
Go ahead. So it's really interesting that you mentioned Australia. We've been contacted by researchers in Australia that are looking at, are the models for abuse that were actually developed on women, do they fit for male victims? Because if you work with this, you know that they don't. And so we now have some researchers going, well, this model was developed for women. Let's look at whether it actually is effective working for men. So again, and that's coming out of Australia.
Can I just add to a little bit there? So when you say whether they would be effective for men, would that be gay men, straight men, trans men? You know, so that's the concern that I have, that we still want, for sure that needs to happen, but I think we still have to get away from compartmentalizing, and we are letting men down. But by saying something is appropriate, you know, this is a workshop for men, or this is an initiative for men, it may not be for all men, and men have different ways they are motivated, just as women do. And so I think that we have to be inclusive in the programming, and we're not being such, but we don't want to just put up more walls.
Yeah, I tend to agree that we don't want to put barriers up. You still have to talk about generalities everywhere. I think the good doctor here is really quite right in the sense this is there, because I've noticed this. I'm not a psychologist. I do law, but I have to deal with people who come in with difficulties. And there's one model I found that was quite good for men to speak up and try to get to fix their issues, and that's called the man shed. And I've lived it myself. You walk into a shed with tools, and while you're carving, drilling, doing whatever you tend to talk and to fix things. So that model, I think, is very appropriate for men. That being said, it's not a question of reserving it to men either, because there are women who work better within that model as well. But that still needs to be studied a lot more.
Are you suggesting that one size doesn't fit all?
Allison, you may have your go. So we're running out of time.
I actually wanted to sort of make a comment about this rather than necessarily
Speak up.
a question.
Louder.
Oh, sorry. Do you want the mic? I can pass it.
Yeah, sure.
Can you pass it back?
I wanted to make a comment about this rather than a question necessarily. When I hear people talking about it polarizing by recognizing that men have a unique subjective experience as a result of their biological factors, what I'm worried about is, and this is what I see every time this is brought up, it isn't really about recognizing that. It's about dropping that and just having women and non-binary. So problem I see with this idea of associating that with polarization is we can respect the experience of people who are not necessarily their sex is different than their gender, and respect the fact that in general, people who have a lot of testosterone because they are male in terms of their genetics, in terms of their genetic expression, have a particular subjective experience of mental health, and they should have the right to that subjective experience of mental health. And I mean, in my personal experience, whatever I'm doing must be doing it right, because I get so many stories from men talking about their issues, talking about their emotions. I don't even have time to actually respond to it, which is something that really affects me. Plus, whatever I'm doing, the community that I've built is 56% straight men, 44% trans, gay, bi, trans men, trans women. We have one lesbian woman. So, I mean, it's possible to create a message that does appeal to men, but doesn't seem to exclude these other categories. And maybe the people who are also amiable to this message, who are trans and bi and gay, and also different races as well. Different militant counts, shall we say?
Well, different ethnicities.
Different
We have a
ethnicities.
very, very diverse.
So it's possible to make a message that appeals to them, and maybe it's that aspect of recognizing that men can be different. So what I've found is that when you allow this idea that men have their own unique subjectivity, these other people are allowed to enter a position where they can take and say, hey, I'm going to help you out as a white, straight, heterosexual cis man. I'm not going to be the vulnerable one anymore. I'm going to be the one who helps you out, to be able to express yourself, to be able to talk, to be able to fully emote and not feel like you have to necessarily always be strong. Because these are the categories, women and all of these other categories are the categories we put everyone who's vulnerable, who needs to be strong for. And it's something about that these people are saying to the category that's supposed to be always strong, no, here, have a shoulder. We can talk about your issues. And it doesn't have to be about exclusion. It doesn't have to be a competition, but again, it allows them a position, these traditionally vulnerable people, to be the strong one for once. It's very satisfying, I think, for a lot of people, that kind of experience.
Well, one of the things I would say is, not recognizing differences is not equality, right? So you don't treat your kids the same. They're different, so they have different you need to have different responses to them. You might love them the same, we got to treat them differently. So I think the whole idea of divisiveness is not about the fact that we use language around male or female or straight or gay or whatever it is, right? But it really is about the attitude that we have when we talk about it. What is coming from our hearts? How are we trying to put forward an argument that is kind of balancing and including what is not being represented, or are we trying to kind of like stake a claim and build an army behind us? And so I love what you said about the fact that you can speak to this and it draws in other people who also identify with it that may not fit the category. But that means that the message is one of inclusion, even though you're speaking specifically about an issue that's not been well represented so far.
Anybody else want to add anything?
I want to say something about the polarization. Now, regarding all the women's groups, all the transgender groups, all the gay men, or basically they're gay lesbians. They have some pride that parades from them. Now the thing is, they are differentiated, but they are very strong in voice. Why does a man?
Why can't he not
Why
be
cannot he
differentiated
be
and strong in his voice?
Exactly, just
Be-
as the same.
Sorry.
You go ahead.
And I'd just like to add to that, to have that does not exclude trans, bi.
Yeah, no, it doesn't.
Right.
It gives them the opportunity to have strength.
Right.
Go ahead.
You're right, good question, but the reason is patriarchy. So the reason is we have a 10,000-year history of patriarchy, which is fueled by the big three religions to this day.
But
And so, hang on, just sorry, 1 second. And so we don't like to move forward. We like to stay in the past and hang on to that. And we are hanging by a thread because those values don't work. They don't make any sense. It fit when we lived in the Stone Age. It hasn't fit for a very long time, but we're still stuck there. So we still like to compartmentalize. Men are the providers, men are dominant, men's testosterone is the problem of all of society.
Right.
Women are helpless, weak, and so when they cry in court, they win, and those sorts of things. So until we move forward and see people as individuals first, and we ask them, how would you like to be understood? How do you identify yourself? And if you are a parent and that's how you're identifying yourself, well, we don't really care what chromosomes you have or what your sexual orientation is because it's none of our business, but you're a parent. And so we are concerned about your parenting. If you're talking about sexual abuse, we're concerned about your sexual abuse. We don't care what chromosomes you happen to have. And so that's where I really want to move away from that idea of polarization, because I do think that it's really stalling us.
But she has a very valid point. And I hear that argument over and over again. Why don't men speak up? Right? So there must not be an issue, because if there would be an issue, men would speak up.
But then they do, and they get called misogynists and Nazis.
It's a catch-22.
Yeah. But a generation ago, men beat their kids as part of normal parenting. And so we're stuck in the past. That's not because they were men, that's because they were taught that that's how you be a dad.
Well,
we are running out of time, so we're not going to be able to take all these hands.
okay, I gotta say something.
Okay.
And it may be controversial again, but look, it's the same situation. I'm gonna be really kind of direct here, guys, okay? Who has heard a rap song? Okay. Do black people use the N-word?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Should white people use the N-word?
No.
Why?
Exactly why.
How about if nobody uses the N-word?
Well, yeah, okay, fair enough.
context,
But it's
people,
the context. You have to understand. Look, there has been a history that has been different for both groups, and this is why it. In some ways, I'm not sure I agree with it, but in the black community, they will use that, and the idea is they're going to take it back. Do you know what I mean? Whereas there has been a history of the dominant society, in this case white people, using that word in a very derogatory way towards people of color. And so the historic context of this makes it very difficult for a white rapper to use that in a song, even though they may have grown up in a black community or whatever. And it's the same situation here with men. That clearly there's a problem. Clearly we need to talk, and I think there needs to be a situation where we can have men's rights groups and all this other stuff and not have massive protests and cutting government funding and all sorts of stuff. But you have to understand.
We might get a Trump-like phenomenon going on where the more they scream and freak out, the more
this is
money
true.
we get.
This is true. But the thing is, currently, the situation is the history of this is too recent and too raw for that to be a viable thing at this point, right? I hope we can get there, but right now, you will get the backlash. People won't be able to hear anything you say after you say that.
So we should strain ourselves up until it gets to that point where we're
No, absolutely not.
Well,
Absolutely not. What we're saying is,
I think the thing you have to do is go forward despite the screaming.
What I would always argue with feminists when they say, well, if you just wait until the culture changes and the attitudes change and the attitudes of the judges change, then you'll get equal custody. And I tell them, you guys didn't wait for equal pay, until the culture changed. You legislated it, and you forced that legislation through. You were the ones who forced through all kinds of changes in the legislation to get what you wanted. You didn't just wait around for societal attitudes to change. So this is a very, very, very difficult thing to be ending on, and I'm sorry your hand is up there and I'm going to have to tell you no.
I just want to say, I'm not saying that's the solution. I'm just saying this is the current situation.
Yes. Oh, I know. I know.
So
It
it's
is.
not.
It's
It's
a
not. This
difficult.
is the right thing to do.
And I'm not leaving. I'm not leaving it here to give you the last word either, because we could have a discussion for another 3 hours on this.
Well,
but
Karen, hold on. I made a mistake at the first conference, in my opinion, when I was the moderator of the final panel, and you were on it. Do you recall?
Yeah.
And we
was
had
it
some.
when you said that I was like from Calgary? Is that what it was? 'Cause
That was another
no
mistake.
forgiveness, no forgetting for that.
We got into some really interesting issues, and I stopped, as the moderator, I stopped the panel on time. And at this point, afterwards, I wished I had gone to the audience and said, what do you guys want? Do you want to continue
Well,
for
I don't
another
know.
half an hour?
Are we going to get booted out? Is that the question?
I don't know, but is that an option here, and is that what we want? What do we want to do here?
Continues going.
There we go. Yeah, and the universe revolves around you, Alice.
Hey, I think there's an opportunity here, though, too, to get people more involved going forward.
Yeah. Okay, so my wonderful microphone lady.
Thank you.
Vanessa.
It's so brief. It's just, while I see how there are pragmatic considerations with calling issues men's issues and men's rights issues, and my opinion as a complete layperson is that we should not act like it's acceptable that when an issue is called a men's issue, it is assumed, if it's called a men's rights issue, there's an assumption that men's rights, they want the right to beat their wives and kids. They want the right to
rape
sleep
women
around and rape women and not have their wives able to divorce them and all of that. That's an unacceptable attitude. We can't just let it slide.
Can I add to that?
We can usually stay till 5, so.
I fully agree with that. Like at my work one time, one of my coworkers brought up the fact that he considered himself a men's rights activist, and somebody laughed. And then I said, no, there are a lot of valid issues. I belong to that community as well, and I explained the issues in a way that was like concise and kind of laid it all out. And the other person wasn't laughing by the end of it. They're like, oh, I see what you mean. So maybe it's just a matter of sitting down with people and trying to explain what people are going through and how these people are hurting and suffering, and they need empathy from other people. And
it's just the word rights.
Yeah.
Just that one word.
I don't want to be in a society where I can't say men's rights.
But because of the background. When people hear men's rights, they think they want to take the jobs back, and women are going to be delegated back barefoot and pregnant. Well, exactly, but let's just get away from thinking rights and just talk about human rights or issues.
I'm going to advocate for women's rights, I'm going to advocate for black rights, I'm going to advocate for trans rights, I'm going to advocate for Muslim rights, I'm going to advocate
Why not everyone's
for immigrant
rights?
I'm going to advocate
because
for
a lot of them have different problems.
For sure they do, but those are issues then. You don't have to make it adversarial.
So is it an issue or a right that it's illegal? It's a felony to cut a female child's genitals, and it's standard operating procedure in most Western countries, or in North America still, at least.
It's a legal issue.
It's a rights issue.
Mm-hmm.
What my conclusion to that is, any group of people where I can't say I'm going to advocate for their rights, I'm not going to accept that.
But you don't have an organization that's called Men's Rights, because when I hear that, I think of the fist and somebody beating me.
Yeah, but that's
so that's
your problem.
it is my problem.
Yes.
But that's part of the background of enculturation. So when you're talking about fundraising and making this, you want people to understand what you're all about. And so if you call it men's rights, they may not understand that. We understand that, probably everyone in here.
But we need to be clear about what the choice is here. And we're called to courage. If we want to change society, and we're facing this kind of prejudice, this kind of automatic assumption that triggers in when we use certain words, then we have a choice to make. And I think, Alison is saying that we need to think about not just going along with the prejudice and trying to work with it, but also saying, maybe we need to confront it.
Well,
and
maybe we need a multiplicity of approaches.
My belief is that we change society most effectively by moving into its shadow, using that in a psychological sense, moving into a place where we are misperceived, and then not being the way that we are expected to be. In other words, if we use a word like men's rights, and we are misperceived because of that, we're going to be expected to be seen as misogynist, we're going to be expected to be perceived as wanting women back in the barefoot and pregnant, and we're not. We're not like that. Perhaps that's the most effective way that we can actually change society, by not fitting the projection image, and that causes people to shake their heads and say, wait a minute, what's going on here? There might be something that I'm missing.
I 100% agree with that approach. I think that is the right approach to take. Okay, can I just let me finish for a second? Because my friend here.
All of y'all, you wait to be called on. All right, I will point at you and then you can talk.
Because as you said, that was exactly what you did. Is like, well, no, hang on. You confronted it. It's like when somebody's bullying somebody, you say, hey, that's not okay. Or you see sexism, or you see racism, or you see, well, this is sexism, really, what that was. And you confront it. And this is exactly like what you were saying. You go into it, you take that position, but then you prove them wrong, prove their misconceptions wrong. But it has to be done with compassion. If you do it with militance, no one's going to hear you. This is how it is.
Okay. Finally, you've had your hand up for so long, and other people just keep jumping in.
Thank you very much, Karen. So thank you to the whole panel. I'll try and keep it brief. In recent times, we've seen the Boy Scouts of America just recently opened up their membership, so now it's no longer Boy Scouts, it's BSA. They kind of degendered it, so now it's boys and girls are allowed in, despite the fact that Girl Scouts already existed. In addition, earlier, York University in Toronto, there was a group that was trying to get a men's issues discussion group started, and the student council blocked them. They said, you can't have this. But there's openly feminist or women's rights groups already existing. And there's also this term going around, toxic masculinity, which now it's kind of spread viral to become almost all masculinity itself is toxic. And it's almost to the point where, like, being an unapologetic man in society is considered toxic. So my question is about male spaces, and why is it that despite the feminist rhetoric of equality and inclusiveness, we're allowed to have female-only spaces, we can have trans-only spaces, we can also have racially segregated spaces, which some people have set up voluntarily on campus, etc.
For people of color.
But if you have a men's group, and you just call it men's discussion group, it'll usually either get blocked or protested or opposed. And so why is this, and how could we combat this trend?
Because I think the actual word in question that is the bad word in the phrase men's rights is men's.
My best way of explaining it is wait till it's your dad, your brother, your son, and then talk to me about how you're going to help them and explain to them what's going on. Because most people have someone that's a male in their life. When they face these challenges, how do they explain to them why nobody cares, nobody wants to help, or nobody's involved in making things better for them? And that usually cancels out anybody's argument. Because, if somebody's one way, most of them have a dad, most of them have a brother, most of them have a son, somewhere in there that they have to say, okay, yeah, if that was my kid, that wouldn't be okay. So, we make up words and say things that aren't true, and mansplaining and all these other kinds of things. They're just euphemisms that don't make sense to me. At the end of the day, I don't think my kids look at me as just their dad. I'm their parent. We've explained the roles don't matter. you know, when their mom does a job that's similar to what a man would do or vice versa, we just consider that parenting. And I think more parents have to take the approach that there isn't a role. It's what those two parents decide the roles are. And then that's how you move forward to teach your kids that they can choose what that is. And I think that gets lost in all of this.
Okay, does anyone else have anything on the panel to add to that?
I just wanted to, this is really interesting conversation. And toxic masculinity is the current flavor of the week in academic, as psychologists, social circles, all of that kind of arena. But the idea, I think, that has been voiced here about reclaiming masculinity, reclaiming it and honoring what's good and well about it, as opposed to let's throw everything out. And I think that's a really valuable idea.
All right, perfect. Gentlemen, not in the very back row, but in the, and then afterwards, the one in the back.
I have a question about just the concept of like diversity and equality and like polarity. And I guess I'm more on the fence that I certainly don't believe there's a biological basis for race as much as I think there's a biological basis to gender. And I'm worried that if we kind of throw out the idea that there could be a biological basis to gender, and then we're kind of throwing out celebration of diversity, and I feel like, I guess my question would be, do you think there's room for, hypothetically, if there is, you know, biological basis for why men turn out the way they are, obviously testosterone plays a role in the aggregate. Is there room for acknowledging diversity while avoiding a polarizing outlook and being inclusive and accepting beyond these differences that are, or is that a necessarily antagonistic concept?
Well, I think Dr. Gans probably has already sort of talked about this quite a bit.
Well, yeah, I think there's definitely a room for that. I mean, listen, our differences make us who we are, whether it's high testosterone, low testosterone, male, female, X, Y, whatever it is. And I think it really is the attitude of not even just acceptance, it's celebration. It's celebration of diversity. It's celebration of our differences. You're a straight 45-year-old cisgendered male, white male. That's okay. Celebrate that. Do you see what I'm saying? Like, there's nothing wrong with who you are. And I think it's the attitude that we have. And I do agree that there's been so much. There's been scapegoating of certain groups that is not correct. And that does nothing for inclusion. It does nothing to move us forward as humanity. Like, some stuff happened in the past, absolutely. Let's deal with it and let's move on. But we have to bring everybody along. It doesn't, we take turns being oppressed. So, I've been oppressed, so now I'm going to oppress somebody else. So, it's my turn to be on top. Well, how does that get us ahead? Nothing gets us ahead. So there's tons of room for that. Tons of room for, you can be whatever that understanding of it is for you. And there's, like you said, in the aggregate, there's lots of that. And that's okay. And there's still room for other forms of who people might be. That's my
Okay, gentleman in the very, very back.
So 8 years in court for custody and stuff and all that. I've been on both sides. Right now as it stands, full custody order, joint custody order is Supreme Court with police enforcement not working. So you see that extreme. I've seen the other extremes. I watched the music awards, and last month I saw Janet Jackson go on there, and it appalled me. And I'm bringing this up. I'll tie it together, please. Bear with me. Is I watched her go on there and talk about how it's about time that women stand up. It's about time that they're not controlled and oppressed. And honestly, in my mind, at that point, after working through being, belligerent and resentful, coming to a place of peace and love and acceptance now, I watched that and it was just appalling. And the first thought that had come to me was like, are we back in the 50s now? Like, it was so harsh to see. We're all talking about all these other equalities and the gay rights and the women's this and the racial show this and all of this, and we've come so far in so many ways when it comes to discrimination and all this tragedy and judgment and hatred. But then when I see something like that, and that's just one little small example of something so blatantly discriminating that is, you know, on a public national level, and I mean, if that was reversed and a guy was saying that, it would be all over the news and be completely destroyed. So I guess what I'm trying to get at and looking for some input in here is how did it get so bad? Because I mean, I can see what you're going to say about the whole, well, this is the big word you use there with the justice system and all that. I get it, but we've come so far. I really don't believe that, because it's not that people don't know. It's not that people don't know that it's not wrong. They know it's wrong. They know it is. They know that it's not. They know it's wrong because they've made the same change in so many other areas of humanity. So it isn't that. It's something else. Well, what the heck is it? That's my question.
That's a question I've been thinking about a lot recently. I'm actually trying to research. I think something significant happened in the 60s. If you recall what Martin Luther King was saying, he was talking about a vision of, you know, little white boys and little black girls sitting down in school together, and why can't we all make this happen and work together? It was collaborative, it was visionary. If you have never seen his I Have a Dream speech, man, watch that on YouTube, it'll make you cry. And then he was assassinated in 1968, and somehow we just lost all that. And what came up in its place was accusatory and grievance-based and self-righteous and morally superior, and we've had that for 50 years. And so, yeah, what do we do? I don't know. It seems to me like there's a massive psychological dysfunction that goes right to the root of what human beings are and what we want and how we go about getting it. That's, you know, there's some deep issue here that is being exploited that is about not wanting to be fully mature adults in the world and get things from others in illegitimate ways, but make that all okay through some kind of smokescreen. And, you know, I think that's the deep stuff that's going on here. But, you know, how do we solve that? Well, I think we solve it with courage and love and truth and being willing to sacrifice to make the truth apparent. You know, like, there's no formula here. But I think we in this room are here because we care about this issue and want to do better. My best advice is let's go back to that thing that Martin Luther King was doing 50 years ago and have a vision and want to collaborate and you know, stop the, at least not participate in the finger pointing. And even the word patriarchy is finger pointing. It's a shaming thing. And so, you know, I'm wanting to hold up a vision here rather than a I think it's very, very difficult to step out of your culture, to not get caught up in what's going down. I think it's very, very difficult. But I had a profound experience at a Jordan Peterson lecture in Ottawa a year ago when he was talking to a public group, very difficult, obscure things, academic arguments, and people were paying attention. The quality of attention was something I had never seen before in my life. And the quality of wanting to understand, and the quality of wanting to have a civil discourse in the Q&A session. There was a resource there that is available to us. There is a resource of mature human civility that is in this room, and that we can tap into and we can call upon. I don't know exactly how you do that, but I think we need to have faith that it's there and that it's powerful and that it can stand up eventually to what we're seeing going down.
Tom, Maddie, you are next.
Oh, thank you very much. So, I really like to comment on stuff I've heard in the past. I didn't want to talk so long because coming from ECMAS, I've had the chance to see a lot of things. We deal both with sort of the counseling of men as they go through family divorces and stuff, and then we try to get them action-based. And we've really seen from your decisiveness, Gans, there's almost like there's two kinds of men now in the world. There is a type of guy, modern term is soy boy. They like these talking sessions, and they find the system that exists is great for them. And then we have another group of men. They don't mind talking a bit, and they need that, but they're very action-oriented. They're very results-oriented. And they're going to these other groups, and they're being told, only deal with what you can control. And that's not good. That's not good for them. That's not good for society, because coming to what you kind of dealt with, Christine, the attitude of men and masculinity has been a very positive thing for our world and society for a long time. You used to tell a man, you can't dam up a river, and he would say, hold my beer. And he'd find a way to do it. And it was that uncompromising, action-based focus that built tremendous things in our society. And tossing that away with the attitude, well, it just doesn't fit our modern ideas, is really going to hurt us. And these types of men, the second type, they're really let down by the current counseling and stuff for them. There's no, they don't want to sit there and talk emotions except for a little bit. They want actions, they want results. When I've dealt with them, one of the effective ways is we'll go shoot some pool, have a beer, and all of a sudden they start talking. And it's a great talk, but they want to come away with what is something I can do to solve my situation. And they don't get that in the other places that they go. When I've gone to those places like Men Without Hats or Momentum Counseling in Edmonton, they feel very threatened by a guy like me being in that group. Because I say to some of these guys, I say, well, what are you going to do about it? You know, and they've been in these groups for a year or 2 years, and they've never fixed anything. And then having someone like me say, well, what are you going to do about it? And the counselors themselves get upset. And so we're really, we're slowing down the improvement of these people like children. We're infantilizing them through their life by giving them services that go on and on forever without putting them into the action-based mode that most men are comfortable with. But finally, I want to come to one thing, and this is a different point of view. Gans, you said we can somehow fit everybody in, and you asked about this as well. Now, I'm going to come at this from a management point of view. I was a senior manager for some big multinationals. I'm sorry, you can't. To try and manage large groups of people on the basis that they're all individuals, they all have differing needs, they all have different resources they need. You can't effectively manage them. You can't make good decisions. You can't make good policies. As individuals, it's like molecules in a box. They're going to go different directions. They're going to go different ways. It's impossible to track. It's chaotic. It's anarchy. It's impossible to control. However, within a box, within a volume, I can predict how it's going to behave. Same with people. If I take a large aggregate of men, there's going to be certain defining characteristics in general. I can make good decisions for that group, good policies. I can provide good resources. So as soon as I start to try and individualize it, okay, well, this guy's trans, and this guy's gay, and this guy's this, and this guy's that, and this guy's that, all of a sudden, I can't make good decisions. I can't make good policies. I really cannot make good decisions anymore. And so as we try and go more and more into the minutiae, I think we're creating policies that are divisive. We're creating systems that are, causing chaos. And again, people know resources are limited. If this guy's getting this, I'm going to have a harder time getting that. And so, how are we going to overcome this? Because that's just the way the world is. In the past, it was like there were certain things kind of set in absolutes. We've been tossing those out the window. How do you manage something for everybody with limited resources and so many, unique elements? Where does it stop?
I think we stop putting money behind some of these things, though, too, right? Money talks. With our court system, if we stopped going to court as often as we do and stopped paying lawyers, are we really going to be funding that system if it's that broken?
But I think he's talking about the sort of one-size-fits-all approaches to, in terms of, this is the way men need to be counseled. And I would say myself that there is a lot of value to looking at the fact that 85% of men are going to benefit from a different form of counseling than 85% of women. right? And that doesn't mean you leave the other 15% in the dust, but you can have some generalizable solutions that are generalizable to those populations.
Well, and there have to be generalizable solutions,
Oh, yeah.
because you're absolutely right. You can't manage for each individual. It's impossible, right? But I think
That's what we seem to be trying to do right now, and it's.
I agree, and like everybody's got a special interest, you know what I mean? And then so everybody, and because of the internet, everybody's heard and everybody's outraged and whatever, right? But I think, as David said, right, it's like we really have to tap into that civility, even if we don't have a system that's perfect, even if it can kind of go for the majority of people, we still can have compassion for. We can still have compassion for. I thought we're under the water. Yeah, we still have compassion for the people who may not fit into the regular generalized group, and still and it's the attitude of that compassion that helps bring them along and helps us to work out whatever we need to do for those people who don't quite fit into the majority, right? Without excluding them or without making them wrong.
Okay, there is that you, David, back there?
Yes.
All right, go ahead. And then I'm going to have one from Robert. Is that you, Robert? You had your hand up, right? No, you didn't? Oh, never mind then. Nobody wants to hear from you anyway. Okay, David, go ahead.
I think we have a couple problems. One is we have a whole huge group of men here who may have seen each other, but don't really network with each other. And that's probably across the whole country. So we don't have any mechanism in place right now which allows this to happen. The second thing is we have all sorts of medical services set up, but we don't offer it equally to both genders. So you have a lady here who handles counseling for
domestic
battered
violence.
men,
Yeah.
but there's no shelters for them to go to. So I don't know what you're able to tell them and address with them, and I don't think they're flown to other countries where they have shelters because they don't have them here. And so you've got this problem where you've got the medical side is not addressing each gender equally, and you have where the men here are not talking to each other and across the whole country for the saying, we need to do something better, but we're trying to do it individually, and it's not working.
Anybody want to?
So there's two places in Calgary if you're a male and you've been abused. And the first one is the Kirby Centre, and so that's age specific. And the second is the Wheatland Shelter, which also has an ability to accommodate males who have experienced abuse.
Okay.
There's a few resources coming.
Yeah. I think Calgary and the Calgary area seem to be kind of the front runners in terms of offering shelter beds to men. I think there's one in Strathmore.
Strathmore is Wheatland.
Yeah. So.
Just say one thing.
Yes.
I just want to say that I think men do need a voice. The women have a voice. Gay people have a voice. Black people have a voice. But men do need a voice. Is all I'm saying.
Absolutely.
Do you know, an icon of this for me is the monk debate of about 5 years ago, put on by the CBC. It's a very big Canadian event. And they chose the topic, are men obsolete? And here's the interesting thing. They had two women to argue that men are obsolete, and two women to argue that they're not.
All four of them self-described feminists.
Think about that.
That's CBC.
You know, we're talking about men not having a voice, really.
Yeah, and then I remember too, because TV Ontario's The Agenda with Steve Paikin convened a panel of men, including one at least from Cafe, to discuss what this means, because the audience at the start of that debate, I think they disagreed with the fact that men were obsolete, but at the end of it, a lot of them had changed their minds. And so the pro side won. Men were obsolete. That was decided. And so they were discussing the implications of this, these male hosts and these 4 or 5 men. And one of the very first comments in the comment section of the YouTube video on that was a woman complaining that there wasn't a woman on the panel. And I was like, are you kidding me? So, yeah. Yes, Allison, one more.
Okay.
2 minutes left.
All right. I wanted to point something out. Did you notice how many women stood up and spoke and said men should have a voice? This is something that I've actually seen with my own community. There's something about when you give people who are traditionally or seen as the disenfranchised groups the opportunity to take that position of advocating for the traditionally strong groups. It gives them an access to an identity that they do not have otherwise. The access to an identity of strength. And it's not like men become weak, but that it becomes a mutual sharing, a mutual protection, a mutual helping each other. And I think that having a service that's just for men doesn't exclude women, it doesn't exclude trans, it doesn't exclude gay, because it allows them to access a different aspect of who they are, which is me being gay, me being a woman, me being trans actually puts me in a position to advocate for men in a way that they aren't necessarily able to advocate for themselves. It puts me in a position to say, hey, you're good, you're doing it good, you should have a voice, and you're doing great, and you're a great guy. And it's coming from somebody who you've been told all your life that you oppress. So it's really, I think it's affirming, and it's affirming for both sides. So to answer your question, can we include everyone? I think that does.
All right. I think yeah, we're done. I did want to thank Dan. He didn't want any thanks. He didn't want to give me and his crew of 14,000 chained slaves organized this event from his volcano lair, and I just want to thank him for putting in the trouble and getting it all. You did a really, really, really good job of making it easy to keep it all together. And I don't know whether you regret asking me to MC, probably. But you do it wrong once, you'll never be asked again. So I guess that's it. Thank you all so much for coming. And